more than 4 decades of legal experience with executive service in all branches of federal government, to include law clerk to a prominent U.S. District Court judge, assistant U.S. attorney and deputy counsel to the President's Council on Organized Crime, chief counsel to the Senate Governmental Affairs and Homeland Security Committee under then-Chairman John Glenn. From this extensive government experience, Steve Ryan built a globally recognized commercial practice and reputation, one that uniquely combines expert advice and counsel with direct representation of individuals, businesses, and most especially, heavily regulated energy and financial services companies in courts of law, all jurisdictions of government, the media, and Congress. Technology is a particular focus of Mr. Ryan's work. In the government technology sector, he is top of the list in matters of procurement, protest, and contract dispute. His impact in the tech sector reaches well beyond government procurement. Globally, Steve Ryan is a major force in Internet policy and is counsel to the Association for the Registry of Internet Names. His work today is in defense of independent Internet governance and security. Current and significant challenges to this security is why he is here in San Diego. Lawyer and litigator, public servant, author, professor, founding executive committee member of the Government Business Executive Forum. For a provocative presentation on current challenges to Internet security, EDGE22 is pleased to welcome Stephen M. Steve Ryan.
Thank you. I just wanted, before he starts, I want to say a couple of things about him. And Steve has been counsel to the GBF since we've been an organization for 17 years. We worked on the Hill together. He always provides a political overview. And we talked this year, and he said, Don, I want to speak, but it's about the security of the internet and what a real threat is. Now, Mick Stawas didn't know it, but he had no idea when he was talking about that threat of moving it under China and Russia to the UN, that Steve is actually defending governance as it is and not moving it. And when Steve told me that, I sent him a note, and I said, God help Russia and China, because this man's tough. And he sent back, Russia and China is a bigger challenge. And I wrote back, David beat Goliath. And he wrote back, David was younger. So please welcome Steve Ryan.
Thank you very much. Don is always so kind, and you're kind to have me back. You're only as good as your last speech, so I will try to amuse you post-lunch today. Let me start by saying that on February 4th, there was an extraordinary event at the Beijing Olympics, and it wasn't the athletics. It was the release of a decree from Russia and China together. And in that decree, which I think is much like the Molotov-Ribbentrop Treaty, that was the treaty between Stalin and Nazi Germany that kicked off World War II, there's a public-facing portion of that, and then there's a private-facing one. But it's an extraordinary document. It's a joint statement of the two governments, and within it, it's a cornucopia of interesting things for Americans. And I don't think it's widely known. How many of you have read the 13 or 14 pages of this? Well, we need to have every policymaker in America read it, because it is indeed extraordinary. Let me start by saying that they call themselves the sides. I've never seen an international agreement where the two states refer to themselves as the sides, but when you see the sides in the document, I want you to look particularly at the second paragraph. The second paragraph that I've put the bullet on there says that they're going to change the structure of the internet governance so that it will be in the ITU. The ITU is the venerable portion of the UN in Geneva that sets up the places in orbit where people can fly their satellites to make sure that people do that. So at 107, 19, 111, 113, those are the slots over the United States where we have birds. So there's things ITU does that are useful. And they don't do anything useful in the internet. Why does Russia and China want to take control of the internet politically to the UN? Because then Somalia and Yemen will have the same votes as Canada and the United States. It simply then puts the Belt and Road countries that are in debt to China or that are in some way controlled by the need for Russian oil. I will say Soviet at some point. I lapse. I'm a child of the Cold War. When they work together, they can get an impressive number of countries in this way, and they limit the United States. Now, I always like the second paragraph of this one. I think the Ukrainians might be surprised. The sides oppose the return of international relations to the state of confrontation between major powers when the weak fall prey to the strong. Now, that couldn't have applied to Ukraine. But in any case, the next important point and the takeaway, it's more than getting the voting control. Once you have the ITU as the standard-setting body for the internet, and the United States violates that by keeping Huawei's gear out of the United States, it becomes a violation of the World Trade Organization agreements. It becomes a political issue in the WTO, not an issue of American sovereignty. So this is a Chinese play. The Chinese play is always more subtle than the gas can with nuclear weapons that's Russia. It is more involved, and as you'll see, they're doing very well with the movement in this area. I have to go back now and tell you, as professionals in this world, you all know what an IP number is. An IP number is either the 32-bit original digits of the internet, IPv4, or it's a 128-bit number that's IPv6. All of you know that. But did you know that there are 5 continental registries that issue those numbers around the world? I was the general counsel of the American registry for the past 20 years. I just stepped down as part of my devolution of being a lawyer and leaving to Stuart Baker all of you as clients. I wanted to say that the issue that I'm going to be talking about today is the Chinese attempt to destabilize the Africa registry, and how the Russians then make that a political issue in the argument for the ITU. So stay with me for a minute. We helped stand up the African registry. When I started work for the American registry that has North America, we kicked out all Spanish-speaking nations to get rid of Cuba. So we pushed that into Latin America. But at the time, we were running sub-Saharan Africa from right off of runway 4 at Dulles Airport as part of what we were doing, which is obviously politically untenable. You had to set up an African organization in the same way that we set up the Latin American organization and devolve the authority. So there's an African registry, and because the countries in Africa that might want to dominate that are Egypt, Nigeria, Kenya, or South Africa, we put it in Mauritius, thinking that we would get rule of law in what is essentially supposed to be an enclave of commercial activity. We got a little more than we bargained for, as you'll see in a moment. So the registry in Africa was defrauded, according to them, by a Chinese gentleman who, not surprisingly, took all the addresses and went to China. And the addresses are now worth $50 per address. So if you do the math of $6.3 million times 50,000, you get a very large number. Depending on the day in the market, it's $250 to $300 million. So these addresses were taken by them, but they were taken for other purposes as well. It was a plot to destabilize the registry. The African registry has tried to revoke those back. Now, Mr. Liu lives in Hong Kong and goes back and forth to China, where I've been able to trace his bank accounts and his various activities. And what he's been doing with those IP numbers is very interesting. There are sworn affidavits in the Mauritian court now from 2 different cybersecurity experts. One, the former Metropolitan of London police forensic investigator who moved to Mauritius, thank God, so that I had a reliable investigator, that indicate that all of the, or a large portion of the numbers are being used to push child pornography throughout the world, including in Los Angeles in the United States. The other affidavit indicates that the other numbers are being used for phishing attacks on major US-based or headquartered multinationals with names like Salesforce, Apple, and Google. In fact, 386,000 of the addresses have Google in them, and they are not a Google trademark owner. So, when you see this Chinese attack, now let's look at how it's being used. On January 7th of this year, the Russians filed a formal document in the ITU saying that the instability of the African registry, which was caused by the lawsuits, 20 lawsuits that have been filed against it by this Chinese guy, are a reason why you need to revoke the authority and bring it to the ITU. So it's all in the family between Xi and Putin, or should I say Mao and Joe. In any case, the activity has led to us to be very disappointed with rule of law in Mauritius. And Mauritius has a very significant commercial relationship with China that I didn't take into account decades ago when we decided that it ought to go to Mauritius. And what's been happening is ex parte orders are being issued by a court without Afrinic being allowed to be there that have frozen their bank account or said they can't have an election. So the Russian argument, which I've put here, shows you in a sense how the two governments are two-timing. One has the provocateur, the other uses it as a policy issue. So let's go to the ITU and think about the ITU. Do you know that for the past 8 years, the Secretary General of the ITU has been a PRC official? It's a surprise, isn't it? So how did the United States government permit this sort of a thing to occur? The answer is we were probably not paying attention at the time. We really should have had someone from the third world who would be a reliable leader instead of the Chinese leader. And he's had 2 terms to stuff all of the decision-making practices of the ITU with PRC's individuals in sections T and R, which are the sections that deal with the internet. China has tens of thousands of people writing standards that they send to the ITU, even though they know they're not going to get those standards into law now, but they're working on the plan being get standard setting at the ITU, then it becomes an unfair trade practice, and we can't do what we normally would do. So there's an election coming, and where's my brother from the Department of Justice? Is he still with us? He did me a mitzvah, as my Jewish friends would say, by introducing this topic of the election coming up at the ITU and indicated he was spending his time on it this morning. Do you notice how we're intersecting on our presentations? So you gotta love this. You couldn't make this up in a comic book that the Russian candidate, who is the leading candidate for China and Russia and the Belt, is a telecommunication executive of Huawei, but is a former official of the Russian government. What could go wrong with this? So the United States corporate sector is working on this issue. And we're contributing money and we're doing things because there's a woman who's worked at the ITU for decades who is an American and who won't be enthralled to her government the way Mr. Ismailov would be to his governments, but she would at least be an honest broker. And it is important that we win that. So is anybody from Qualcomm in the room? Qualcomm and other companies, Intel and others, know that this is happening and we're working on it, okay? So I want to just come back now and I want to tie up what we have here. What we have here is that in August, President Xi is going to be running for re-election. And once he's reelected, which is a certainty, we have a period of time before Taiwan is attacked. There'll be a period of time. It won't happen immediately, but the window is going to close on when China can attack Taiwan, because now we know what Taiwan has to do as the playbook. Taiwan knows what it has to do as the playbook to address the Chinese threat, because the Ukraine in 2014 wasn't ready, but 7.5 years later, thanks to the United States and others, it was ready, okay? And Taiwan needs to get ready, and Xi is not going to necessarily allow them the time to do that. So if you thought the world looked bleak today on day 135 or 137 of the Ukrainian war, these two are operating together. Now, let's go back to political theory. At the turn of the 20th century, we had two great strategists. One was Mahan, the United States naval strategist, and the other one was Mackinder, who was a Brit, or Scots, I'm not sure, but he was from the UK, who said you can't allow the Eurasian landmass to be controlled by one political entity. Well, guess what? We've slipped containment, because China and Russia now together constitute that very threat of control of the entire Euro-Pacific map. We spent all of our treasure and blood in the 20th century to prevent somebody from allowing this to happen, and look what we've got now. So our strategy of containment, of not allowing a great power to do this, which was the British policy before we assumed their mantle in the world because they were so exhausted from World War II. This is the world we now face, okay? And the ITU battle is only one battle. The people in this room are doing the other battle every day, which is the real bits and bytes thing that is going to either save our country or not. Now, let me go back and say, if there's one organization in the United States government that is different than when I grew up in the United States government, it's the FBI. I want to say that the presentation we had this morning from the FBI, I entirely believe. I have been persuaded and have taken my clients to the FBI every time I have a breach to get their help. I have learned which squads are the Russian government squads that deal with the GRU and the FSB, the ones that deal with the Russian hackers, the ones that deal with the Chinese government, and then the Chinese hackers. I may not know what I've got, but I approach them each time. And I have to say, Stuart Baker alluded to this earlier today, and I'm sort of Stuart Baker light if you think of it that way politically. I think the world has changed, because I don't think I would have trusted the FBI decades ago with the kind of information that I've voluntarily provided with my clients in making that decision, and they've been terrific about the promises. So when the American registry had an Iranian steal 537,000 addresses, which is a very small block of addresses compared to the Chinese one, I brought that case to the FBI, and they just convicted that Iranian guy in a court in the United States District Court in South Carolina, and he's headed for sentencing. So literally, I'm now packaging cases for the FBI and bringing them the cases from my client to assist in the prosecution of people who have breached my client. And you would be interested to know that Mr. Liu and his company approached our entity, the North American Registry, and got 0 addresses. And he got millions and millions from both the European Registry and from Afrinix. So internal controls and good procedures kept us from being defrauded and looking like idiots in the same way that my compatriots in Africa and Europe look like. Not that they intended it, but that's the end result. So I want to segue now to the last point that I want to make with you. Tomorrow, at 10 o'clock, there's going to be a panel on the supply chain. I consider that panel the penultimate and most important thing that's going to occur other than my speech today. Tara Murphy Doherty and Govini have done so many important things for this group, but her leadership tomorrow in that group is going to pick up an idea I want to just introduce to you. I think that the way that we have to address the supply chain is ABC, anywhere but China. We have to get China out of our supply chain on a variety of ways. And we've spent the last 3 decades uniting our economy with them. And now we've got to unwind it. But look what happened in Russia. If you have an investment in China, I would sell it now, by the way, because you're going to go to zero in a couple of years if they actually move on Taiwan, right? Second, we can't not know what's in our stuff anymore. We can't not know that. And certification by a vendor is not satisfactory because it is not the proof that we need. It may even be well-intentioned and based on as good a job as they can do, but it's obviously not correct after solar wind or finding in the Aegis missile system in a ship that there's Chinese gear, okay? So what do we need to do? I think what we need to do is a public-private partnership. I'm a big believer in public-private partnerships as a way to avoid regulation. And earlier, Austin Gold was talking about how they had all of these meetings with the pipeline companies before they regulated. I believe that we need to voluntarily do this as industry in the United States. We need to get ready for this event. And the only way to forestall a grotesque and not well thought out set of government regulations is if we go talk to government and work it out together. Let me say one place where this is happening. There's an SBIR contractor named Providence Chain that has gotten a contract with Space Command to do exactly what we're talking about with every purchase order and every transaction that goes into what's in the rockets that Space Command's going to launch. They're doing it and locking it in a blockchain so that the proof is there. So it's not a certification-based activity. Now, the real problem for our industry is twofold. The more difficult problem, and I don't know how to solve this problem in any way, and I'll be interested in hearing the panel talk about it tomorrow, is the SBOM problem, right, in software. I think that's extraordinarily more difficult than the already difficult thing we're going to do with regard to the rocket. Now, let me say what's in between and is equally difficult. Don Upson and I, who became friends decades ago in government when Republicans and Democrats worked together, knowing that we had to work together for the good of the taxpayers and the country, we did a lot of things together. And we need that approach here, that industry, which we set loose to sell commercial products to the government, the laptops, the servers, and all of that, we're going to have to find out what's in the gear, right? We're going to have to do it where we know that many of the government laptops come from something where the label on it tells you it was made in China. Now, there are companies like Dell that are trying to make sure that that's not the case for their product, and every one of us ought to be buying gear thinking about, have we worried about the ABC problem? And so I think that if you want to be a government contractor in the future and you have software and hardware, we may have to work together to do this rather than in a regulatory way. And so I want people to look up this Providence Chain company. I find it intriguing, and what they're doing intriguing. And there are probably other examples that you know that I don't know, or other efforts that are underway. We're going to have to use the Defense Production Act to stop buying things from China. Now, these are the policy outcomes that I think are the ineluctable conclusion of this concern about China literally taking over in a political sense the internet, let alone their dominance in international economic espionage against the United States. So that's what I had to say today. I really hope you'll take my plug on the FBI. I hope you'll take my plug on public-private partnership. And I look forward to really having you buy me a drink at Don's Open Bar tonight. Knowing some of you have deep pockets but short arms, I love that we can have a drink together on Don. And I want to just thank you for having me here again. I hope I've provoked some thought. It was really hard to follow Skunk Baxter, by the way. I mean, what am I going to talk about? My brain, which, stewed on Manhattans and martinis? No. So in any case, thank you very much for your time today.